Ryan Coleman-Williams might be one of the fastest and most dangerous receivers in college football, and he is also one of the most frustrating evaluations on my board. Back-to-back Alabama Mr. Football winner, five-star recruit, reclassified to arrive at Alabama at 17 years old, immediately produced as a freshman with 48 catches, 865 yards, 8 touchdowns. First team All SEC, 75-yard game-winning touchdown against Georgia. You know, you saw the speed was real, the acceleration was real, the yak was real, the vertical tracking was real, but the hands are the issue. 10 drops in 2025, body catches under pressure, slight frame that gets rerouted by physical corners, in 2 games against Auburn and Missouri where he was held without a catch. So today we're breaking down Ryan Coleman-Williams, my current number wide receiver 8. Why the upside is starter level and why his entire NFL projection may come down to whether the drops get fixed. But before we get into that, make sure you hit the like button, follow, subscribe, as we keep putting in this work on our way to over 100 prospects before college football kicks off. We are already 3/4 of the way there, folks. Welcome back to Draft Yoda, where we're data-driven and prospect-focused. Ryan Coleman-Williams is currently holding a grade of an 8.76 out of 10, making him my number 75 overall prospect, wide receiver 8, going into this season. And this is one of those profiles where you see the most electric but complicated receiver in this group. When you watch the speed, you understand the hype immediately. He can separate. He can stress coverage from the slot or outside. You know, the player can turn short throws into chunk gains. It's a player who can outrun you vertically. And he's a player who can change the math on an offense just by alignment. But wide receiver is not just about getting open. You have to finish the play. You have to catch the football. You have to be trusted on third down. You have to survive contact. You have to keep producing when defenses take away the easy touches. And that's where the evaluation gets complicated. You know, Ryan Coleman-Williams grew up in Mobile, Alabama, played his high school football at Saraland. Is not just productive high school receiver. He won Alabama Mr. Football 2022 and 2023. You know, back-to-back. 2022, he became the first sophomore in state history to ever win the award. As a sophomore, had 88 catches, 1,641 yards, and 24 touchdowns. As a junior, he came back when everybody knew he was that guy and still got 72 catches, 1,324 yards, and 19 touchdowns. You know, that's video game level production. That's not just fast, that's dominant. He was a focal point. He was a player defenses knew they had to stop, and he kept producing anyways. He also ran track and had a 10.49 100-meter. You know, that's just not us talking speed. That's hey, we got numbers to back this up. That's track speed. He has real speed, football speed, track speed, game-changing speed. You know, 5-star recruit. Originally belonged in the 2025 cycle, but reclassed to 2024 so he could arrive at Alabama as a 17-year-old. And the age context is important. He was young. He was still physically developing, and he was already being asked to compete in one of the most demanding programs in college football. You know, his recruitment had drama. He originally committed to Alabama under Nick Saban. Saban retired. He decommitted. But eventually, he recommitted to Kalen DeBoer over Auburn, LSU, and Texas A&M. That says his belief in Alabama and Alabama's belief in him, that he's not just another receiving recruit. He was a player the program wanted to build around. And as a freshman, you saw why. You know, 48 catches, 865 yards, 8 touchdowns. You know, first team All SEC, second team All American. You know, he had a massive year for a freshman receiver in the SEC. And it was all highlighted by a 75-yard game-winning touchdown at Georgia. That's the kind of play that becomes a part of a player's story. Freshman on the road at Georgia, game on the line, and you're the guy who caught the ball that changed everything. Made the one play that made the explosive touchdown that won the game. That's the type of thing that writes you into a history. Then his sophomore season came around, and it didn't take the leap most of us expected to see from him. 49 passes for 689 yards and 4 touchdowns across 14 games. Isn't bad numbers, but after a freshman year, the impact felt less explosive. The touchdowns dropped. The production trailed off. The flaws became a little louder. And that's the why in this evaluation of what makes it so interesting. If you watch the high school tape and the freshman tape, you think this is a future first-round receiver. He should be up there with the Cam Colemans, Jeremiah Smiths of the world. But when you see the late season of his sophomore year, you start looking at him like, I don't know. Maybe he should come back to school. Is he a boomer bust? Those are the questions that start coming out. You see the speed is real. The production was very real as a freshman. But the trust has to improve that he's going to continue to improve. Speed is the first thing that jumps off the page with him. It's the foundation of the entire evaluation. He can stress coverage from the slaughter outside. He can force corners to open early. He can make safeties widen. He can create space for other receivers, and he can punish bad angles. I saw it time and time again watching his tape, and the acceleration after the catch is phenomenal. Produced 331 yards after the catch in 2025. And that matters because you're just not seeing a vertical player. You're seeing a catch and run weapon. You get him the ball quick and he can create, screens, glance routes, crossers, slot touches, motion looks. When Coleman-Williams catches the ball with space, he can turn a normal play into an explosive one. And that is probably one of the more valuable parts of his game. When you look at the Wisconsin game, 165 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's the version of Ryan Coleman-Williams that every evaluator wants. He is rolling. He looks like one of the most dangerous receivers in the country. He separates. He catches after the run. He creates explosive plays. He puts stress on every level of that defense. It's a type of game that tells you the high-end outcome is very real. The issue is consistency, and we'll get into that in a second. Another thing that I really like about him is his release. It's a very sudden release. He swipes jams. He can uncover early in a route, and that matters because at 178 pounds, he can't afford to get stuck at the line. He has to win quick. He has to avoid contact as much as possible. And he has to beat the leverage before the defender can control him. You did see, especially late in the season last year, where bigger receivers that got their hands on him were able to jam him and really control his route from the off start. And that's one of the things that can improve. But we'll get to that. The first thing that needs to improve is his hands. It's the biggest issue of this entire evaluation. 10 drops in one season is not acceptable when you are supposed to be as big of a player as Ryan Coleman-Williams is. 10 drops is not a minor note. It's not something that you just brush aside. Drops change drives. Drops kill trust. Drops make quarterbacks hesitate. They make coordinators think twice on third down. And for Coleman-Williams, the problem is not just one bad game. The hands grade sits near the bottom of the draftable group. That has to change. If he fixes the drops, his grade will rise extremely fast. If he doesn't, the role becomes harder to trust, and he may just be a great freshman wide receiver that disappears. Another concern is body catching. You know, when pressure is coming, when contact is arriving, when the window is tight, he can let the ball get into his frame. And that's a problem. Receivers have to attack the ball with their hands, especially smaller receivers. You know, if you are not big enough to shield defenders consistently, your hands have to be reliable. You know, Coleman-Williams has not become more he's become a more natural catching away from his body, but he needs to be more confident and more consistent in it and more aggressive at the catch point. You know, NFL defenders will crowd him. They will hit him. They will test that concentration, and he has to show that he can finish through that. You know, as 178 pounds, he's got a slight frame. You know, the effects of and it affects multiple parts of this evaluation. You know, press coverage, contested catches, blocking, contact balance, durability. The play strength has to improve. The physical press corners can reroute him and knock him off off the schedule. And that's a problem because timing is everything for a speed receiver. You know, if a corner disrupts the release early, the whole route changes. And that's a half a second longer your quarterback has to hold that ball. And in the SEC, let alone in the NFL, a half a second longer can be the difference between a clean release and a lineman grabbing at your body. For a player of his caliber, he also needs to stop disappearing in games. Against Auburn and Missouri, he was held without a catch. And that can't happen for a player of his talent. Every receiver has quiet games. That's normal. You know, I expect a receiver to have a 1 reception, 2 reception game every year. I expect it. I anticipate it. But 0 catches is loud. It tells me the defense found a way to take you out of your easy touches, and it tells me the offense didn't trust you after those easy touches. You know, it tells me that Coleman-Williams still has to prove if he can win when the first plan gets taken away. That's what separates weapons from trusted number 1 targets. Can you produce when the defense knows you're the threat? Can you win when they get physical? Can you find answers when manipulated touches disappear? Because if you can't, I can't trust you on 3rd down. And as a quarterback, I don't know how they could trust you on 3rd down. Your speed is great. Your explosiveness is great. The yak is amazing. But when it's 3rd and 6 and the ball has to be caught, can Ryan Coleman-Williams answer that right now? The drops make it hard for me to say yes. You know, it doesn't mean he can't become that. It doesn't mean he can't prove it. You know, the NFL is not just looking for explosive players. The NFL is looking for reliable, explosive players. Ryan Coleman-Williams has that explosive part down like nobody else. Now he just needs the reliability. You know, 2026 is the year where he can change the entire conversation. The checklist is clear. Cut the drops. Catch the ball cleanly away from your frame. Add functional strength. Beat physical press more consistently. Stay involved, even when defenses give him extra attention. You know, produce late in the season and prove you can be trusted on 3rd down. If he does that, he will climb up this board fast. He will skyrocket on it because the traits are already there. The speed does not need to be invented. The yak ability doesn't need to be invented. The vertical tracking doesn't need to be invented. The hands just have to catch up. And if they do, he becomes a completely different evaluation before the draft. You know, he can absolutely climb up this board. He is one of the ones that I have circled that could truly climb up this board in this season. He's young. Like I said, he came in at 17. Very young receiver. If he starts to figure out some of these smaller issues, even the biggest issue of the 12 drops and catching the ball with your body. Those two big issues. If you take those out, you jump from wide receiver 8 to wide receiver 4 or 5 very quickly. And that's the difference between a potential end of first, early second, to the 75th overall prospect. 8.76 out of 10, 75 overall, wide receiver 8's where he currently sits. He's explosive. Top percentile speed receiver, sudden release, vertical tracking ability, alignment versatility, dangerous catch after the run, acceleration. You know, you don't win back-to-back Alabama Mr. Footballs. You're not a 5-star recruit for nothing. You showed it in the freshman year. Ryan Coleman-Williams showed it his freshman year. I just need to see him catch away from his body. I need him to not disappear completely in games. And I need to see him be more consistent on third down. Because if all that happens, the sky's the limit. It's absolutely the limit. What do you think about Ryan Coleman-Williams? Is he one of the most explosive receivers in college football? Can he climb higher than wide receiver 8 if he improves the hands? You know, how much should drops matter when receivers, separate this easily? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and follow for more as we're on our way to 100 prospects before college football kicks off. As always, I'm Draft Yoda, Bill Workman, your favorite draft nerd's favorite draft nerd, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.